Russia is on fire. Explosions are hitting deep inside the country, shaking key factories and energy sites far from the front line. At the same time, the battle around Kupiansk is turning. Ukrainian forces are pushing back and breaking Russian plans. Behind the scenes, the Kremlin is suddenly talking about peace, but its conditions raise alarms rather than hope. Meanwhile, Western support for Ukraine is accelerating fast. New weapons, air power, and logistics are changing the rules of the war. Pressure is building everywhere, and cracks inside Russia are becoming impossible to hide. Let's break down what's happening right now. Hello, this is Ukraine Today. Maria Farafonova here with the latest updates. Horror! It's burning. Drones may have struck the mechanical plant in Orsk. A series of explosions was heard in Orsk, Russia. Local residents reported loud blasts, after which a thick column of smoke rose above one of the facilities. Preliminary reports indicate that drones may have struck a mechanical plant in Russia's Orenburg region. According to media reports, the facility was linked to Russia's military-industrial complex. Local residents said the detonations began at the site following the strikes. Powerful explosions were also reported in Yaroslavl. A large-scale fire broke out at one of the country's largest oil refineries, Slavnefteyanos. Local residents reported 5 to 7 strong explosions and the distinctive buzzing of drones over the city. Despite official claims of air defense activity, both Russian sources and Ukrainian OSINT analysts confirmed that the refinery was hit. Videos circulating on social media show a massive blaze. After the strike, Yaroslavl effectively came to a standstill. Traffic congestion reached 9 points, while FSB and security forces cordoned off nearby areas around the facility in an apparent attempt to conceal the scale of the damage. Russian forces have been pushed back, a serviceman reported on Ukrainian armed forces gains in Kupiansk. At one point, Russian occupiers claimed that Ukrainian forces were encircled in Kupiansk-Kharkiv region, claims that did not reflect reality, although the situation was difficult. This was stated by Alexander Musienko, a serviceman of the Territorial Defense Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, who noted that the enemy intensified activity on the Kupiansk axis several months ago. Over the summer, the occupiers achieved some tactical gains, managing to enter the city and attempting to organize an encirclement operation. As Musienko emphasized, Ukraine's defense forces ultimately stabilized the situation on the flanks. Despite this, Russian troops tried to establish crossings over the Oskil River in various areas, but Ukrainian units destroyed them, preventing the occupiers from advancing from the east.
Eventually, the situation was stabilized. Our units began counterattacking and pushing the enemy out of Kupiansk. The occupiers entered through the northern part, almost reaching the city center. The situation was threatening, but we managed to repel the enemy. In some areas, we cut their logistics. The adversary tried to restore them and had some success, but then their supply lines were cut again.
This was followed by an operation to push the occupiers out of Kupiansk. The enemy brought in reserves and attempted to launch an offensive near the northern outskirts, but without success. Ukraine's defense forces are now continuing to clear individual districts of the city.
Active combat operations are ongoing on the approaches to Kupiansk. The objective is to push back the Russian grouping and take up more advantageous defensive positions in this sector while holding Kupiansk.
The Kremlin claimed it is ready to withdraw troops from Donbass, but set conditions. Russian dictator's aide Yuri Ushakov said that the region would sooner or later come under Russian control, if not through negotiations, then by military means. At the same time, he allowed that under certain conditions reached through peace talks, both Ukrainian and Russian troops could be withdrawn from the region.
A ceasefire can only come after Ukrainian troops withdraw. And what happens next? In my view, that can be discussed later. There may be no troops present at all, neither Russian nor Ukrainian.
However, he clarified that in such a case, the region would not be left without Russian control.
Yes, but there will be the National Guard, our police, and everything needed to maintain order.
The statement was made against the backdrop of US-backed peace talks, which propose creating demilitarized zone or a free economic zone. President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, noted that such an option raises a question of fairness, why one side should retreat while the other does not. By the end of 2025, Ukraine will receive $5 billion worth of weapons under the PURL program for purchasing U.S. arms funded by Western partners. This was announced by NATO Deputy Secretary General Radmila Shcheryinska. According to the official, by the end of December 2025, Ukraine will receive military equipment from U.S. stockpiles, primarily air defense systems. Ammunition and critical spare parts will also be delivered. According to Shcheryinska, the program's logistics operate around the clock through Polish and Romanian hubs. The defense packages are financed by European allies and Canada, as well as Australia and New Zealand, which have recently joined the PURL program.
The lion's share of air defense assets arriving in Ukraine comes precisely through Pearl. It is literally the difference between life and death.
A dark future is taking shape for Putin's Russia. By 2026, millions could face rolling blackouts, decaying infrastructure, and severe water shortages beyond the regime's so-called border of civilization. Ukraine's relentless campaign is exposing deep cracks in the Kremlin system, on the battlefield and across the country. The forces behind this collapse and fresh frontline updates in our full military briefing.
A disaster for Russia from the Ukrainian armed forces. Ukrainians are responding to the Russians' blackout with a blackout of their own. As the Russians themselves write, there has never been such a critical number of drones before. The strike on the Dorogobush thermal power plant in the Smolensk region has been confirmed. A bright fire broke out in the area of the strike. Drones also struck the Akron plant in Veliki Novgorod, which produces fertilizers, some components of which are also used to make explosives. A fire also broke out at the site. The mayor of Moscow reported that 31 drones were allegedly shot down over the capital during the night.
This is the use of up to 300 aerodynamic strike assets. This is a record number. The Russians are forced to acknowledge the very fact that the Ukrainian side is scaling up its use of strike drones and improving their tactical and technical characteristics.
Ukraine is using the Long Neptune, Palyannitsia, Flamingo, and Sapsan missiles. At the same time, some of the strikes remain indeterminate for the enemy in terms of the type of weapon used.
The Ukrainian defense forces are also armed with the Long Neptune. The strike range is about 1,000 kilometers. In addition, there is the S-200 surface-to-air missile system modified for strikes against ground targets. The Russian side was forced to acknowledge the successful use of S-200 surface-to-air missile systems, let me note, still of Soviet manufacture, against air bases located on the territory of the occupying country. These are Milerovo and Baltimore.
President Volodymyr Zelensky noted that there are many instances when our enemy believes that Neptunes were used.
At the moment, the Ukrainian president has announced the scaling up of Ukraine's ballistic missile program. First and foremost, this concerns the possibility of scaling up the production of the Flamingo in 3 modifications, with target engagement ranges of 200 kilometers, 800, and 3,000.
The security service of Ukraine struck the Filonovsky oil production platform, which belongs to Lukoil Nizhne Volshkneft, according to journalists. This is the first strike on Russian oil infrastructure in the Caspian Sea. At least 4 hits have been recorded. Oil and gas extraction from more than 20 wells has been completely halted.
Previously, the main focus was on oil refining enterprises, oil refineries located within the Russian Federation, but now accordingly, strikes are also being carried out directly on oil and gas production sites. Such strikes are specifically and strategically aimed at blocking the very possibility of oil and gas extraction operations for the energy needs of the Russian Federation and its allies.
As of December 11th, the total combat losses of Russian troops in Ukraine have reached almost 1,500 personnel. In the past 24 hours, the enemy has also lost 7 armored combat vehicles, 23 artillery systems, and 82 drones.
Under the cover of thick fog, Ukrainian defense forces managed to bring heavy armored vehicles into Myrnohrad, and according to the Russian side's own assessment, Ukrainian tanks have significantly slowed the advance of Russian assault groups.
In the video, you can see the process, so to speak, of the work itself. Specifically, how Ukrainian fighters eliminate Russian troops in the Pokrovsk direction, which has been a tough challenge for Putin for over a year now.
A new flashpoint is emerging near Transnistria. Russia has sharply stepped up mobilization in the occupied region of Moldova, summoning reservists, reactivating old weapon stockpiles, and reportedly launching drone production for its forces. As tensions rise, key questions remain. How will Chisinau respond? And is Moldova nearing the moment to reclaim territory long dominated by the Kremlin? All the details in our full report.
Moscow is stepping up its activities in the occupied region of Moldova to divert Ukraine's resources by increasing the threat from the Russian enclave. Military units and quasi-formations are calling up reservists, and weapons are being taken out of storage at the depots.
The discussion turned to the repeated detentions and hours-long searches of Transnistrian residents at the Chisinau airport. The Transnistrian side has demanded that Moldova stop its pressure. Complaints about the actions of the Moldovan authorities are also being submitted to the public chamber of Transnistria. In
Transnistria, production of UAVs and a drone operator training center have been established. This was also stated by Alexandru Bujorian, the mayor of Leova, in September.
According to our information, Russia is trying to organize drone production on the territory of Transnistria. We have the specific names of 2 factories in Tiraspol. We are talking about Moldavizolit and Elektromash.
The pro-Kremlin newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda reported on the information about drone production in Transnistria.
Normal, strong, good neighborly relations and the complete absence of any conflict, both originating from Ukraine and from Moldova.
Moscow is sending intelligence agents to Transnistria who have been tasked with sowing chaos through information operations and carrying out provocations. The Russian Federation hopes to destabilize the situation in Moldova and on the border with the southern regions of Ukraine. Due to the actions of the Russians, the risk of sabotage groups infiltrating our country is increasing. If necessary, the Kremlin will be able to use the resources it has accumulated for escalation.
As for the relations with the Russian Federation, they are much more transparent, considerably more understandable to me personally, and indeed more stable and enduring.
The Kremlin has established a state there with an isolated banking system, a non-convertible currency, and a massive level of corruption. In Transnistria, almost every second company belongs to the oligarch Gunshots,
who controls a significant part of the PMR's economy. According to some reports, Sheriff provides more than 50% of the region's tax revenue, and tens of thousands of people work at the holding's enterprises. Back in 2015, Gunshots was called one of the richest people in the post-Soviet space, and his fortune was estimated at $2.1 billion.
Ukraine froze Gunshots' assets because his companies supplied goods and services to Russia's military-industrial complex.
And according to the Moldovan State Services Agency, as of 2024, Moldavizolit continued supplying goods to the neighboring country. The Ukrainian investigation claims that goods or services from the Moldavizolit company ended up in Russian defense system structures that produced weapons used in the war against Ukraine. This creates a legal link between assets associated with the Sheriff holding company.
This is yet another blow to Putin's war machine. Previously, another blow was the fact that after Gazprom stopped supplying gas at the beginning of 2025, gas to Transnistria has been coming from Moldova gas.
The energy crisis in Transnistria, which triggered an economic crisis, is ongoing and it threatens to turn into a real humanitarian catastrophe.
In addition to the resources with which Putin bribed his enclave, he also provided Transnistria with political and military support, maintaining his own military contingent there.
It is necessary to thoroughly examine what the Russian operational group of forces actually is and to propose appropriate solutions for dismantling this structure. But at the same time, there is also the so-called Transnistrian army on the left bank. At 12 Manuilova Street in Tiraspol, there is the so-called Ministry of State Security, which is something like an analog of the KGB or NKVD and keeps the residents of the left bank in fear. There are various types of special battalions.
The separatists are armed with grads, drones, and even helicopters and tanks. Russia could also mobilize civilians from Transnistria to whom Putin has distributed plans to join the European Union in the coming years. To achieve this, the Moldovan authorities are obliged to address the conflict in the Dniester.
As for the actual resolution of the conflict in Moldova, we are committed to facilitating a negotiation process that will involve both the Transnistrian side and our supporting international partners, first and foremost the European Union, the United States, and the OSCE.
In order to keep its protégé in power, Russia launched a hybrid operation related to the so-called presidential elections in the PMR. In 2026,
Russia has acted and continues to act as a guarantor of the Transnistrian settlement.
Putin's main goal in Transnistria remains to make Tiraspol dependent again, improve the image of the local pro-Russian leaders, and quietly increase the number of military personnel in the region. So instead of dealing with his own economic and political problems, Putin is focused on militarizing the territories he has occupied.
Poland is tightening control of its airspace over Ukraine as military cooperation intensifies. Warsaw has confirmed talks on transferring a substantial number of MiG-29 fighters to Kyiv, a step that could shift the balance in the skies. Combined with incoming Western aircraft, including French Mirages and Gripens, Ukraine's air force is entering a new phase. How this reshapes air defense and strike capabilities in our next report.
Ukraine has strengthened its positions in the sky. Volodymyr Zelensky announced the reinforcement of the Ukrainian Armed Forces air fleet.
Every visit, every negotiation always brings practical results for our defense, for our resilience. Today, our combat aviation has been reinforced. Thank you. The details are not public yet, but we are constantly gaining strength in the sky. Oh,
which specific systems or aircraft are we talking about? It is unknown, but at the same time, the Polish General Staff reported negotiations with Ukraine regarding the transfer of MiG-29 fighter jets to Kyiv. As part of the deal, Ukrainians will receive MiGs and the Poles will get technologies for joint production of drones and missiles.
We are pleased to inform you that negotiations are underway with Ukraine regarding the transfer of MiG-29 aircraft. The transfer of the aircraft is due to them having reached their operational lifespan and the lack of prospects for their further modernization within the Polish armed forces. We also inform you that a final decision has not yet been made. The transfer of the aircraft will be part of the alliance's policy to support Ukraine and ensure the security of NATO's eastern flank. The tasks currently performed by the MiG-29s being withdrawn will be carried out by F-16 and Fa-50 aircraft.
In addition to operating Soviet models, Ukraine is actively introducing Western fighter jets into its fleet. In November, Kyiv signed an agreement with Paris and Stockholm to produce Swedish Gripens and French Rafales for the Ukrainian armed forces.
The production rate for Rafales is 3 aircraft per month. This is much more than the production of Gripens, which is only 12 aircraft per year. And France plans to increase production to 5 aircraft per month. In
the case of the French Rafales, Ukraine potentially receives not just a fighter jet, but also a DCS-linked node for the diverse fleet of Western aircraft supplied to the Ukrainian armed forces.
Networked interaction, in other words, makes it possible to effectively unite all that zoo of aircraft that has been transferred to the Ukrainian side. These are the F-16s, Mirages, and accordingly the Rafales themselves, as well as the possible transfer of Gripens. All of this enables the use of the Rafale F4 specifically as a key node in the combat network. That is, in effect, at the moment of interaction with other aircraft and air defense systems, it creates a unified air defense complex.
Western fighters such as the Rafale, F-16, Gripen and Mirage have an advantage over their Russian counterparts when it comes to internal systems. This ranges from electronic warfare equipment and detection radars to modern missiles. Air-to-air.
This fighter has received a modernized radar, which is capable of operating under electronic warfare countermeasures. Additionally, the front sector optoelectronic system allows this fighter to detect targets better at long distances and under more challenging conditions.
But under the current combat conditions, fighters, whether Soviet MiGs, American F-16S, or French Rafales, are primarily used as air defense assets to repel massive enemy missile and drone attacks.
That's all for now. Stay with us to be the first to know what's happening right now. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon!